game.
Back in the early days, video game characters had no clue how to swim. Even when our video game characters did finally learn how to swim, our fear of water was kept alive by all those creepy monsters lurking in the deep. The water itself even felt like it was leaping out and trying to drown us.
Really?
To trace the roots of our gaming hydrophobia, we need to go back 30 years to the birth of the platformer. Pitfall introduced water as a lethal hazard, an approach many others soon adopted. Video game water may as well have been sulfuric acid because most of the time dipping your toe in was pretty much lethal.
Oh, jeez, no.
This was partly to inject some danger, but mostly it was because swimming and splashing water was beyond the simple game engines of the early 80s. As the complexity of the platformer evolved, including water levels became the new de facto standard. They provided developers with an easy way to add variety into the template. However, they normally left gamers with a depressing, sinking feeling. Super Mario Bros. Established the water level template that many games would go on to sheepishly follow. Unfortunately, these levels were the worst part of the game because Mario's precise controls became painfully slippery when wet. There were also some glaring inconsistencies about how the game chose to deal with water. Mario must have had hidden gills because he could stay underwater for as long as he wanted. Bizarrely, he lost all these magical aquatic powers when he was on dry land. Sonic chose to take the wet stuff a little more seriously by adding the danger of drowning. This, however, was a bit of a mixed blessing. It upped the realism, but the murky controls were an absolute disaster. Thankfully, Golden Axe finally turned the tables and let us drown our enemies. As 2D graphics improved, so too did the aquatic gameplay. Donkey Kong Country featured gorgeous levels that were fun to navigate thanks to improved swimming controls and the inclusion of a fish you could even ride. It was Super Ghouls and Ghosts that set the high watermark for 2D platformers though. Huge tidal waves would tear portions of the level right from under your feet. And rather than opting for slippery controls, a floating raft was used to keep the same tight platforming mechanics on a giant heaving ocean backdrop. I'm not getting in that. However, there were a handful of 2D titles where water was more of a tranquil playground. You could go for a relaxing fish on the Atari 2600, enjoy a surf in California Games, or frolic about the peaceful water world of Echo the Dolphin. In the late 90s, the arrival of 3D was a watershed moment. The floodgates opened, unleashing an amazing new range of aquatic gameplay to dive right on into.
.2D classics like Rayman and Mario were quick to experiment with 3D water.
It wasn't until Zelda that clever water-based puzzles finally emerged. Like using metal boots to sink to inaccessible depths and pulling switches to flood chambers. Then the aptly named Ocean created Wetrix, a puzzle game based on water simulation. You captured water drops on a floating platform, while power-ups changed the conditions. Later, games like Half-Life 2 and Resident Evil 4 evolved water puzzles with floating physics. One of the important genres that 3D created was wave-based racing games. Wave Race 64 rendered everything from still as glass lakes to pounding surf. The tide also went out between the laps, changing which bits of the track you could race on. A storm of aquatic races soon followed, but most like Hydro Thunder and Bloodwake just sank without a trace. It wasn't until Nintendo's sequel Wave Race Blue Storm and its rival Splashdown that we saw worthwhile advances. Today's consoles powered a new wave of water effects that arrived on the scene with a big splash. The flat, lifeless water of yesteryear was washed away and replaced with sun-speckled beauty.
Water had gone from a loathed element to the highlight of most graphics engines.
We've seen Arctic wastelands, submarine adventures, rain-swept decks, and even some wet t-shirts along the way. Nice. While water-based races have dried up, we have seen it cleverly injected into some recent games. One of Trials Evolution's tracks used water to fling you around like a cork. And MotorStorm Pacific Rift had a love-hate relationship with water. Driving through it cooled your engine, but straying out a fraction too deep meant instant death. Just Cause 2 was another aquatic highlight, especially when you skydive kilometres straight down into the ocean. Plus, it's got the best boat jacking ever.
Tough luck, compadre.
WoW took water levels to a new depth with Vashir. There were entire underwater quests to complete and massive sea monsters you could battle. Recently, water's even been used as a central plot device. BioShock plunged us into an underwater world that was literally dripping with atmosphere. It wedged gamers between the decaying insanity indoors and the constant pressure of the ocean depths outside. The game also injected water into your arsenal, making it lethal for any enemy stupid enough to take a dip. Hydrophobia's convincing water tech should have capitalised perfectly on the decades of fear we've had of water. But repetitive gameplay flushed away most of its potential. Then the noir classic Heavy Rain drenched both its gameplay and plot in water. The plot has a serial killer drowning his victims in rising stormwater, and the unyielding rain is a metaphor for the depressing tone, leading to a desperate fight to escape a sinking car. The game's not all bleak though, because it used water to whet our appetites with some raunchy his and her shower scenes. So there you go. Over the past few decades, water has really undergone a caterpillar to butterfly transformation. And after forcing us to suffer numerous water levels and plenty of drownings, it's now a stunning highlight and a compelling plot device.